And I've just hit the recording button and I think we're good to go, Jenny.
Wonderful, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Promoting Community and Wellbeing in a Remote Learning Environment. We wanted to mention that this is being recorded. If you want to, you can turn off your video so that your image isn't showing during the webinar. That's up to you. The slides as a PDF version and the recording itself will be posted on the TLS webinar at the link where you accessed it today. My name is Jenny Ferris. I'm an academic associate at Teaching and Learning Services, and I'm joined today by colleagues Carolyn Samuel, Mariella Tovar, and Ava Dobler, who will be moderating the chat. So welcome. I'm going to briefly go over our agenda for today. We'll be stopping at a couple of points in the webinar for questions or ideas in the chat, because we recognize that it can be hard to listen and think or type questions all at the same time. Later on in this webinar, we'll talk about providing structure for your courses, which it can involve giving participants and students a heads up on what to expect, and sharing an agenda slide as we're doing here at the beginning of a class is one way to do that. So we're into the welcome at this point. We've done our introductions. In a moment, we'll share some goals, do a quick check-in, and then we'll explore a bit more in depth as small groups, this idea of course context, before going into 6 strategies for promoting community and well-being that you might consider within your classes, and then a closing. Our goals. Over the next 28 minutes or so, you'll have an opportunity to reflect on your course context, to consider relevant strategies for promoting community and well-being in a remote learning environment. When we talk about well-being, that's for students and for instructors. So thinking about what's feasible for everyone, recognizing that people are experiencing various home circumstances in these times. Students and instructors might be caregivers, maybe working across time zones. There may be financial concerns, health concerns. So part of what we're encouraging here is trying to be realistic about what can be done and what is good enough. And I realize that even thinking along the lines of good enough can be an adjustment in itself for many of us. We're hoping with this webinar to get you thinking about what might be possible within your course context. We'd invite you to share your ideas and questions at set points and recognize that it's possible that some strategies will be relevant and other strategies won't. So feel free to take from this what you think could work well within your course context. We'd like to begin, or we have begun, and would now like to proceed to a check-in, asking you, how are you feeling right now? I realize that these options are not comprehensive, but if you're feeling uncertain, energetic, tired, laid back, or ready to go, and I'll ask Carolyn to launch this poll.
The poll has been launched.
Thank you, Carolyn. We'll leave a few seconds for folks to respond.
So we've got answers coming in. Jenny, do you see the responses?
I do. Great. Okay, so we have nearly everybody who's responded. If you're not able to respond for some reason in the poll, you're welcome to share your answer in the group meeting chat. I see somebody has written all of the above. Fair enough. We're feeling lots of things these days, and sometimes all in the same moment. So, Carolyn, if you could please end that poll. And would you please share it with the participants?
There we go.
Great.
I hope everybody can see the responses.
So it looks like of those responding, the largest category is actually ready to go, which is wonderful to hear because it's what we've got to, it's what we've got to be. But recognizing that there's also, feeling many experiences at the same time, many emotions. There's elements of uncertainty, some energy, some tired. I can feel that too. And some laid back. So a whole variety of responses here. Thank you. So if Carolyn, you could please stop sharing the results for now. And so we wanted to share this besides wanting to share some fun puppy pictures just to liven things up a bit, because polling can be a good way of checking the temperature in your classes. You can use it to see how students are doing or to gather information to inform your teaching. For instance, you might ask students what time zone they're learning in, or how many other classes they have right now concurrently with yours, or if they have access to reliable internet when they need it. So while we're sharing this poll in Zoom, you can also do polling surveys in My Courses as a way of polling students who don't attend a Zoom session. And as this somewhat playful check-in shows, images can be part of polls as well. So looking at our ways that we can keep pedagogical principles in mind and firmly grounded as we're considering different strategies we can use in our courses, I'd like to encourage you to keep pedagogical principles in mind in terms of thinking about the course context first. So today we'll take some time to think about who are your students. While course context involves various considerations, thinking about why a course exists, what role it plays in the overall program, your learning environment, there's also this big question of who your students are. And that's what we're going to focus on today. Because if we're thinking about strategies for building community and fostering student well-being, it's important to think about who those students are. This will be complemented by exploring teaching strategies that can help students to meet those learning outcomes that you've already articulated for your students. So, again, this question of how can you create community if you don't know who you're with, we want to take about 5 minutes now to break into small groups. And before we do that, I'm going to explain to you what we'll be doing once we're in those breakout rooms. We recognize that you might have quite different contexts for the different courses that you'll be teaching or that you've taught most recently. Some of you might be in very large class contexts. Some of you might have smaller groups or seminars or labs. Some of you might be teaching students who are part of the same cohort who have been taking courses together for a number of years. And some of you might be teaching students who are meeting one another for the first time in this remote learning environment. So recognizing these various entry points for building community, we encourage you to think about your context and how it might impact your approach to creating community. So in about 1 minute, we'll be breaking you into groups. And I'd like you to think within your groups about the response to one of these bulleted questions and to share that with your group mates. So we'll be in smallish groups, and so you can share your response to one of those bulleted questions. So either relevant personal characteristics, motivations for taking the course on your student's portion, prior knowledge and experience, or what barriers to learning your students might experience. Now, Ava has included in the chat there instructions for the breakout room activity. If you click on that link or copy paste it into your web browser, you'll have access to these 4 bullet subpoints during your breakout room, as you will not see the slide during the breakout room experience. Once you've shared those ideas with one another, we'd like to invite you to brainstorm, if you don't know the responses to one of these questions, how you might find out. So I'm now going to ask Carolyn to put you into breakout rooms. This activity is short. It will last about 4 minutes, and then you'll be invited to come back at about 4 minutes from now.
Okay, so I'm just about to set the rooms, and here we go.
Welcome back, everyone. Can I ask if my PowerPoint is still showing?
No, it's not. You need to share it again.
Very good. Going to do that. Okay, is it now showing at the engaging group work slide?
Yes, it is. You're good to go.
Excellent news. Wonderful. Thank you. I have to admit that I'm still getting familiar with this myself, so I appreciate your patience with navigating these transitions from various screens. So thank you for engaging in that breakout room experience. I'd like to invite you now. I hope that you had good conversations. I'd like to invite you to share in the chat window, if you don't know the answers to some of these questions about your students, how might you find out? So using a poll, through a survey on My Courses, ask them. Yes, so thinking about different ways that we can ask students, that we can reach out, chat, absolutely. So something like what we're doing right now. through a group discussion. We have a question here, anonymous poll or not. That's a choice for you. It can depend on the question that you're posing, both in terms of whether you need to know the information associated with a specific person and thinking about the student's level of comfort with sharing that information if they know they're anonymous or not. Zoom has both options for the poll. SurveyMonkey survey, certainly. So thinking about different platforms, it's something that could happen within Microsoft Forms, within Zoom, within My Courses. Yeah, so seeing somebody mentioned that asynchronous teaching, so thinking about more flexible teaching, which could include recorded classes. It could include video practice quizzes. That can be a nice approach as well, especially for students who have limited internet access. Quiz on learning styles. Oh yes, survey on forms. Asking students to identify themselves in their situations. Great, thank you. So those are some great ideas for thinking about if we don't know the answers to some of these questions, how we can inform ourselves. I'm trying to move to my next slide, one moment. There we go. Okay, so now we'd like to share with you 6 different strategies that regroup sort of some sub-strategies. A question here, I must have missed it. How do you set up the polls? I'm hoping that Ava can send a link on that, but there also will be, at the end of this PowerPoint, we have a resources slide that will likewise be posted on our website that includes some direct links. So a first idea in terms of supporting community and student well-being is to acknowledge the new environment. So recognizing that people are feeling different feelings, as we saw earlier on with that poll, and thinking about how we can balance students' different lived realities at this time and our own lived realities with addressing the course context. Recognizing that people might be experiencing new tech, new living circumstances, caregiving responsibilities, and so on. So in acknowledging this new environment, it can be helpful to stick to what's familiar in terms of assessment strategies, in terms of ways of engaging with students. So for instance, if you're accustomed to having small group discussions in class, thinking about how those experiences can be replicated in a remote teaching and learning format, for instance, through My Courses with the discussion tools and so on. Or if you choose to have fixed scheduled activities, such as Zoom courses through the breakout room tool. Thinking about also providing support for less familiar things. So recognizing that we are making certain adjustments for new technology. So for example, if students might be unaccustomed to participating in remote learning such as this, you might share netiquette guidelines with students. So thinking about etiquette for engaging on the web. This could be things like participating in discussions, participating in chats. You might see that sometimes in chats, if somebody's answering a question, they'll put an @ symbol before the person's name to whom they're responding as a simple way of indicating to whom they're responding within the chat. Thinking about what equitable approaches look like within a remote learning context. So the Equity website at McGill actually has some best practices that they've shared for inclusive student-centered learning in remote contexts, and that link again is on the resources slide at the end of this webinar. Thinking about expectations, managing our expectations for ourselves and for our students, and thinking about what is feasible, what is reasonable, while still keeping in mind the learning outcomes for the course and thinking about different ways that we can help students to meet those. I also want to mention other support services for students and for staff, including instructors. There's the Wellness Hub and Student Services, which more generally, which have a variety of services still available virtually, as well as self-care for instructors. So there's a link, again, in the resources to some different considerations that we might keep in mind for ourselves. And I want to especially mention the Employee and Family Assistance Program, which still remains available to us even in a virtual context. Number 2, communicating with students. So thinking about different ways that we can represent ourselves to our students. For example, creating a profile in My Courses, to build rapport. This might include a short bio, an image to personalize your course, even a 1-minute informal video about yourself, if that's something that you're interested in doing. You can also add a photo to your profile on Zoom if you're teaching classes at a fixed time. Thinking about online or remote equivalencies for things we do in person. So for example, we can still schedule, if you choose, online office hours that could either be by appointment or drop-in, so that students can be in touch with you. You can have a waiting room feature enabled so that you don't unexpectedly have 2 students at the same time. But you can also look at options for having small group office hours. For instance, if students are doing a group project and you'd like to touch base with them to see how it's going midway. Certainly, when we talk about communication, it can involve some element of planning. So thinking how you can clearly communicate with students, how they can contact you, your email, your office hours, and what your response time is. So for example, saying that you will respond to emails within 48 hours or 48 business hours of receiving them. Also saying how students can, or what your expectations are for students in terms of accessing course materials. What frequency you'd like them to check your My Courses website, for example. Names. So recognizing that sometimes, especially in large classes, it can be very challenging to memorize students' names. We actually have a little bit of a leg up on this one now, because we can think about how we can ask students to include their name either with the profile, with the fixed schedule teaching, such as with Zoom, or we certainly have access to students' names within My Courses. So thinking about how students can change their name in Zoom to their preferred name. They can include pronouns and even a pronunciation, if that's helpful. You can also think about how you can invite students through a check-in to share with you what they're comfortable about how you can support their learning. That could be as simple as asking, what do I need to know so I can support you in your learning at the beginning of a course? Moving on to our 3rd principle, which is providing structure for the course. The principle after this is actually a bit of a complement to it. So we're looking at structure, but also agency. So this one's looking at structure. Thinking about things like sharing the class agenda, as we did the webinar agenda earlier today, including break times or pause points. It can help be reassuring in helping students know what to expect. You can have specific chat times where you pause the live classroom discussion to give students time to process or synthesize. And certainly thinking about how you organize your materials on My Courses, for instance, in as logical a way as possible. That could be by unit, by day, or by week. You can also choose to create discussion threads for frequently asked questions or for students to share ideas with one another about adjusting to remote learning. So thinking about different ways that the discussion threads as well can help to provide structure for students' experience. And finally, thinking about how different aspects of the course fit together and how your course fits into the larger structure of the student's program. So students can sort of contextualize it within that big picture idea for their course. So we just see a question here in the chat. How would you go about organizing pause points? That's a good question. It can be something as simple as after 10 minutes of discussion, permitting 2 minutes and saying, I'm going to pause the discussion or the lecture, as the case may be, for now, and we're going to take 2 or 4 minutes to go to the chat and invite people to share either questions or a key idea that they've heard in the last 10 minutes, that sort of thing, so that you're giving some time for people to jump in the chat or to unmute their microphone, if that might be another approach to it. So I'd like to turn this over to Carolyn, who's going to provide some ideas for the remaining 3 principles here.
Thank you, Jenny. So we'll move on to number 4, which is give students agency. And we can do that in a variety of ways. So we can think about letting students choose what they wish to share with us if they're in a virtual environment that is in real time, as we are in Zoom right now. So students can choose whether or not to show their faces, to have the video available. And I think it's important to keep in mind that students will be in different places. They might be in their homes, they might not be in their homes, they might be in somebody else's home. They might be I don't know, they might choose to be private, to want to remain private behind the screen because they're not well, because they're looking after people. It could be that they have limited bandwidth, which would be a reason not to show their videos. So just think about the different circumstances that students are in and allow them the choice of whether or not they want to show their faces on camera. You can allow students agency over a certain portion of their grade, perhaps. So where appropriate, you might choose to drop the lowest quiz, for example, or you might want to let students choose between two different assessments, and they can make that choice before the fact, not after the fact. You can have students choose among multiple due dates, possibly, and yeah, so you can think about staggering the assignments if you like and providing students options in that area. We have some examples of options on the TLS website in the disruption section. I think Ava's going to put the link in the chat to some example evaluation schemes. In case you need inspiration, you'll be able to access those. Students can also choose to express themselves in different ways, perhaps with a virtual background. As you can see, I have Arts 150 behind me, so I'm not at McGill, I'm not on campus, but I've made a choice not to show the actual place I'm in, and I'm showing a McGill location instead. So students might want to choose what they show you and their classmates on screen. You can allow students to participate in different ways. They can speak orally, perhaps, or maybe just use the icons that you have on your screen for expressing themselves. So they can show the thumbs up, they can do a virtual clap. So you have an array of icons at the bottom of your screen. You can also have, yeah, somebody's just given the thumbs up there. So thank you very much for that. That's an illustration of how we can use the tools. Students can also participate, of course, in My Courses. Not everybody will necessarily be participating in real time, so it's good if you can allow an alternative in the My Courses site for students to express themselves. Students can also perhaps provide you with some feedback on how the course is going midway through. So you can ask students to do a mid-course evaluation, and again, Ava will put the link in the chat for that. And you might want to ask students something like, what's working well for you up to this point? So consider doing a mid-course evaluation as you go through this, because it's a new experience for everybody. So the information might be helpful. And you can, of course, direct students to some remote learning resources also on the TLS website, and the link will be in the chat, and allow students to develop their own study skills for this type of environment. Okay, Jenny, let's go to slide 11. And number 5 is design ways for students to work together. So we suggest that you provide opportunities for students to work together both in real time, so according to these fixed schedule activities, like if they're live in Zoom, or to do this in My Courses with a more flexible schedule. So there can be recordings, video recordings, or practice quizzes. Students can use the discussion forum in My Courses or the chat function in Zoom, and that's a way for them to engage with one another's ideas. And as you know, you can create groups in Zoom, but you can also create groups in My Courses. And it looks like Ava has her hand up. Ava?
Yeah, I just want to alert you to Rosalie's question in the chat, because I think that actually fits in really well here, because she mentioned, she says, I also don't really know how to use class time to do group work if not everybody can participate. So I think it would be good if that could be addressed right now.
So I'm just reading here, to use class time if not everybody can participate. So I'm not sure what the environment is. If you're doing this in real time, of course, it's the people who are online at the time who will be able to participate. But you can put, let's say you're doing an activity where there are questions that students have to address. You can put those same activities or those same questions in My Courses and have students participate at another time. So it doesn't all have to be in real time, but you can have sort of parallel activities or parallel exercises available in real time and in my courses, which would be according to a flexible schedule, in the hope that students can log on at some point. It could be that some students don't have internet access, but that's another story and we won't address that today. So I hope that's helpful. Let's keep going. I'm just looking at the time. We're just about out of time. So slide 12 here, frame assessment as an opportunity for engagement. We might want to think about who is providing feedback to whom and why. And we can allow students the opportunity to engage in peer assessment, but also self-assessment. And my courses can be used to set up self-assessments. And just wanted to mention something that's little known about my courses. You can have audio recordings in there. Like, you can give your students audio comments on their work. It doesn't always have to be typed feedback. So we can record our feedback comments and make those available to students, but students can also record themselves making comments and they can be shared in the discussion forum. Okay, let's keep going. And Jenny, I think this one's over to you.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. So we realize that we are at 12:46 here. If you have other commitments that you need to go to, we absolutely understand. We will stay on for several minutes more. And I'd like to invite you to share in the chat what your main takeaway is from today's session. And I'd put a little addendum to that, that if you have a strategy that you've been using that works really well, that we haven't addressed, please do share that as well. Thank you so much. We'll be looking at those comments, so we'll stay on for a few minutes still.
And if you have questions, we're here for those as well. Et si jamais vous voulez poser des questions en français, il n'y a pas de problème, que ce soit dans le chat ou que ce soit oral, aucun problème.
Great, so seeing some ideas about video feedback. Fun polls when students are at the beginning of Zoom. And again, those polls though can occur within my courses as well. I saw a question also about minimizing Zoom fatigue. I don't know if some of you have been experiencing this as well, but certainly sometimes going from meeting to meeting or class to class in Zoom can take a cognitive load toll. So thinking about how we can take certainly pauses within the course or within a meeting can help that. Also thinking about how what has to happen within Zoom versus what can happen more on a flexible schedule. So taking advantage of some of those options within my courses that Carolyn had mentioned earlier. There was a question, please make the chat available to us afterwards. In principle, if you look at the bottom right-hand corner of the chat, there should be 3 little dots that you can click on and then click Save Chat. Okay, so if there are some challenges with accessing the chat, I'm not quite sure why the file was empty. That's a good question. I can look into that, but certainly in terms of ways to save the chat, that's something that can be set up ahead of time, especially if you're the meeting host. That is an automatic setting. Takeaway, give choices, agency, providing ownership of learning. Absolutely. I'm thinking about how, for your course context, some balance between teaching flexible teaching or fixed teaching, depending on the context, might make the most sense. Think about what your students' needs are, what their access questions or concerns are, and so on.
And there was a question here about a webinar on evaluations. We will have some more webinars coming up in May. And please check the TLS website for information about upcoming events.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. That was my question. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Question here about how to build community with students outside of class, like an online platform where they might chat about the class. So there are certainly options within my courses to do that. There's the discussions option where you can create discussion threads on different topics and students could participate in those. There are also, in terms of document sharing, there are options like OneDrive where you can upload a document that multiple students can work on to co-construct some ideas. Okay, so I think we'll stay on for about 1 more minute. And thank you so much for your participation. A question about instructions for using OneDrive for collaboration. OneDrive is one of the tools that's offered under the Office 365 licenses through McGill. So there is documentation within the IT knowledge base on different ways to share files and so on through OneDrive. And you're certainly welcome to contact a question here about getting in touch with TLS. You're welcome to contact us at tls@mcgill.ca. We don't have, at this point, a certain answer in terms of what the fall will bring, but we all hope that that's coming soon. Great, thank you so much. I think we'll end the webinar there for today. Thank you so much again. We wish you an excellent day.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.